Hey guys, it's Chris. From a coma survivor who woke up with the memories of someone else's life to the teenager saved from his coma by chicken fillet. Here are 10 of the most amazing people who woke up after a coma. Number 10. Ghost Boy. Martin Pistorius fell into a coma in the late 1980s at the young age of only 12. Martin remained in his coma locked in a vegetative state. For 12 long years he was in this coma. That's as long as he had already been alive. Doctors could not pinpoint what caused the boy's illness. They suspected it could have been cryptococcal meningitis, and physicians were positive that Martin would soon die. Nonetheless, his parents cared for him the entire time. They even had an alarm set for every 2 hours so they could turn Martin in his bed, and that prevented him from getting sores. This went on for 12 long and very difficult years. And then Martin woke up. The craziest part about Martin eventually waking up is that now he claims that he remembers a lot of what happened while he was in this vegetative coma. He recalls being trapped inside his coma as being stuck inside his body with no ability to communicate or move. It was a living nightmare. Martin even wrote a book about his experience, and in his book, he claims that after about 2 years of being a vegetable, he gradually began to wake up. He then spent the next 10 years as a ghost. His mind was awake, but his body was still in a coma. He heard what people said, and he lived every day in utter misery. But now, he's miraculously very much awake and doing much better. Number 9. 27 years asleep. A woman named Muniria Abdullah from the United Arab Emirates was injured in a car accident back in 1991. For the next 27 years, she lay dormant in a coma. At the time of her accident, Munira was only 32 years old. She'd been in a car that crashed into a bus on her way to pick up her child from school. The accident gave her a severe brain injury that resulted in her coma. At the time, her son Omar was only 4 years old. But one day, Munira woke up. After bouncing between hospitals in London and the UAE and Germany, she finally regained consciousness in 2018 after years of treatment and surgeries. Omar, who is now almost the same age his mother was at the time of the accident, was there to see her stir from her very long sleep. And while she wasn't immediately cognitive and fully aware, she did seem to be pulling out of her vegetative state. Omar said in an interview, "I never gave up on her because I always had a feeling that one day she would wake up." Now Munira is in Abu Dhabi, where she is currently undergoing intense physiotherapy to improve her posture, to prevent her muscles from being damaged, and to try and live some kind of normal life. According to the BBC, cases like this are very rare. Almost nobody recovers consciousness after being that long inside a coma, and even fewer people go on to lead any kind of normal life. Most people who regain consciousness after long comas have serious disabilities because of all the damage that has been done to their brain. Number 8. The Pandemic Awakening. A British teenager named Joseph LaVille was struck by a car on March 1st, 2020. At the time, the United Kingdom only had about 23 cases of a strange and new virus. After Joseph was hit by the car, he fell into a coma that ended up lasting for 10 whole months. Almost a year later, Joseph was recovering in a changed world. When he had gone into his coma, everything was completely normal. But when he woke up, he found himself living in a dystopian fantasy. The world was different, everything was closed, and the entire social fabric had been altered. To make matters even worse for Joseph and his family, his mother had only been able to visit him in the hospital throughout the pandemic from a distance, dressed from her head to her toe in special protective equipment. And even though Joseph woke up from his coma and was transferred to a care home to recover, his mother is still waiting until she gets the green light just to touch her son for the first time in a year. The lucky part for Joseph is that he pretty much managed to escape a lot of fear the pandemic caused at the beginning. There will be a crappy spot where the pandemic had ruined everyone else's lives, but not his. If he had to be going into a coma at some point, 2020 was probably the best year to do it. What part of 2020 would you be happiest to forget? Let me know in the comments, and then don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The Wrong Life. Alpha Kabija from the United Kingdom was riding his bike when he got hit by a van so hard that his brain was knocked out of place inside of his skull. Alpha was in a precarious state and needed to be medically induced into a coma. This coma lasted for 3 weeks. Before he was woken up, doctors told his family that he probably wouldn't remember anything that happened before the accident, including his own identity. Doctors basically said he would probably have amnesia, but instead of amnesia, Alpha woke up with someone else's memories. He apparently remembered that he had a girlfriend who was pregnant with twins. He could even remember the names he had picked out for his twins. He told his family that he could remember the day of his accident, saying that he was on his way to see his girlfriend after he had just completed a job interview. This guy also thought that he owned a private plane. Man. None of these memories were true, but they also didn't belong to someone else. There was no paranormal nonsense going on here. The memories had been fantasized, probably inside of his mind during the coma. His subconscious had somehow merged his real life with a fictitious life that he dreamed up for himself. Number 6. Chicken fillet coma. A spectacular miracle recently unfolded in Taiwan when a young teenager who'd been trapped in a coma for 62 days woke up after his brother offhandedly mentioned chicken fillets. As it turned out, chicken fillet was the teenager's favorite food. He apparently liked it so much that just hearing about it woke him up from his coma. This poor kid had been in a serious scooter accident just months before and had suffered serious bleeding inside his organs and slipped into a very deep coma. He'd been in the intensive care unit ever since. He'd gone under the knife at least 6 times for operations, including to repair his liver and kidney and to fix issues with his cranium. But despite all the surgeries, he was not waking up. It wasn't until while his older brother was visiting the hospital and said to him, "I'm gonna eat your favorite chicken fillet," that the boy sprang to life as if released from a spell. I guess those were the magic words. The teen has since recovered and been discharged from the hospital. Number 5. Coma after birth. Famous YouTuber Grace Victory had a very tough few months. First, she got infected with COVID-19. Then she gave birth. She was actually induced into labor 2 months early because of the virus. Just a single day after giving birth to her son, Grace was put into a medically induced coma. This happened on Christmas of all days, and it took 3 months for the British YouTuber to be pulled out of the coma, at which point she finally met her son, already 3 months old. Grace had been put into the coma because of respiratory issues. When she was admitted to the intensive care unit on Christmas Day, she couldn't breathe. The only way to help her recover from the virus was to put her into the coma, allowing her body to rest. And Grace is now awake and back online. Number 4. Birth in a coma. Speaking of comas and babies, a Canadian woman from British Columbia needed to be placed into a medically induced coma because of COVID-19 complications. Just like Grace Victory, she too had been pregnant. The biggest difference with Jillian McIntosh was that she had her baby while still in the coma, which you might not even believe is possible. She was completely passed out and unconscious when she delivered her son Travis. It wasn't for a full month until she was taken out of her coma, at which time she was shocked to discover that her son was already a month old. She hadn't even known the gender, and she could hardly even remember that she had been pregnant in the first place. And when the doctors told her what happened, she was quite surprised. Luckily, there was no long-lasting damage to her brain. Jillian was discharged from the hospital after waking up from her coma on Christmas Eve and arrived home to find her son waiting there for her along with her husband. Talk about a Christmas miracle. Everyone in the family is now happy and healthy. Number 3. 39 years later. Jean-Pierre Adams never woke up from his coma. It's been 39 years. Adams was once a French international footballer on his way to becoming a legendary athlete. Then he suffered a minor knee injury in 1981. The procedure to fix his knee was only estimated to put the sports star out of action for a couple months. However, a dangerous dose of anesthetic left him trapped in a coma he's still in today. 39 years is one of the longest times that a person has ever been kept in a vegetative state. Today, Adams is 73 years old. The anesthesiologist who caused his coma in the first place went to court in 1990 and was given a 1-month suspended sentence and a bit of a fine, but otherwise got to live the rest of his life pretty normally. Adams has been cared for by his wife for the past almost 40 years, and she continues to refuse to pull the plug. This is despite people insisting that pulling the plug might be the right thing to do, especially after such a long time with such a bleak outlook for the future. Even though he's in a vegetative state, Adams is still able to eat and apparently hear. He has a completely normal routine, waking up in the morning to eat and then sitting around all day in his wheelchair. But even if Adams ever wakes up, The experts say he will not recognize anyone and would probably not remember any details of his life. Number 2. Spanish learnings. Ruben Nismoa got a concussion when he was just 16 years old. The concussion was so serious that he ended up in a coma. This all happened just because of a soccer game. The Atlanta teen was kicked in the head by another player during the game. But the coma didn't prove deadly. Ruben did eventually wake up, but when he did, he found he had an ability that he had never known about. He was suddenly fluent in Spanish. According to the report from CNN, Ruben had been able to speak a little bit of Spanish, but nothing fluent. After waking up from his coma, he could speak perfect Spanish like he was a native speaker. This is something known as foreign accent syndrome, and it's a rare condition in which some kind of brain injury causes a change to a person's speech pattern. It can either give someone a new accent or apparently, miraculously teach them how to speak another language entirely. The first case of this came in 1941, when a Norwegian woman suffered a brain injury during a German bombing incident and woke up with a German accent. Another incident of this happened a few years ago, when a Navy veteran passed out in his motel and woke up with no memory of his old life, and he could only speak Swedish. To this day, there have been less than a few dozen reported cases, and none of them make much sense to mainstream scientists. Number 1. Terry Wallis. Terry Wallis is considered the longest ever coma survivor. It was 1984 and Terry was only 19 years old when he and 2 of his friends flew off a small bridge in their pickup truck and landed in a dry riverbed. The crash left Terry unresponsive and essentially brain dead. He was in a vegetative state, and doctors gave him virtually no chance of ever recovering. However, Terry soon entered what is known as a minimally conscious state, according to the report from the New York Times. This diagnosis meant that Terry could track things with his eyes. He could sometimes respond by blinking or grunting, and he was vaguely aware of some things. Terry spent the next 19 years sitting inside of a nursing home, with family members visiting him occasionally. One of his visitors included his daughter, who had been only 6 weeks old at the time he went into a coma. Then, after 19 years, Terry suddenly became aware. He began speaking out of nowhere. He could remember people and faces. He began to make a recovery, and to this day, Terry is alive and doing relatively well. He spends most of his day in bed listening to music, but he's awake and he can speak and understand most of what's going on. He's been studied by doctors all over the world, interviewed by news crews from all over the country and abroad, and is living a pretty good life now considering he was a vegetable for most of it. If you could speak any language when you woke up from a coma, which one would it be? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for another awesome video.